Welcome to Racing Girls Rock podcast, presented by the Women's Motorsports Network. I'm Melinda Russell, the founder and CEO. I also founded the International Women's Motorsports Association and the Women's Motorsports Network News online magazine. Today's episode is brought to you by our official travel planner, Brittany Heisinger. Brittany specializes in Disney trips, but can book any trip, anywhere you want to go, from Hawaii to Houston, Alaska to Australia, or anywhere in between. Last year, she helped over 100 families plan magical vacations to Universal Studios, Disneyland and Disney World, Mount Rushmore, Las Vegas, Cabo, Hawaii, Aruba, and Iceland, to name a few. In just her first year since joining the Smart Moms Travel Group, she's won the Rising Star Award, the Top Paid Agent Award, and won a rewards trip. She hit her sales goal, joined Team Fantasyland at her agency, became a Walt Disney World pass holder and Magic Key holder, and more importantly, has made lifelong friends. You can connect to Brittany on Instagram at Travel with Zing or give her a call at 602-291-5144. Check out the show notes for more information and tell her Melinda sent you. And now it's time for this week's show.
Different vehicles between us, so we're neither one of us is stopping the other from getting more cars. We were just talking about what we need next, so it's a problem. And then we also have 3 dogs. We're not going to get any more dogs yet. Maybe a cat, I don't know. But so that's sort of that's the base from where I operate, and then I travel a lot to write stories and talk to people about cars, which is similar to what you're doing.
Absolutely. We both have that in common, don't we? And so tell me, how did you get interested then in cars? Usually when I talk to women, it's the dad who got the daughters interested in cars, but not always. Sometimes it's the mom. So how did you get interested in cars?
I hear that a lot too. The got interested in cars through a car family is probably the most common way to do it. It kind of gets passed down. I did not grow up in a car family. In fact, currently every single member of my family drives a Prius, and only when they have to. So there were no hot rodders in my family, and I didn't actually learn how to drive at all until I was 21. Because nobody at home wanted to drive, and so they were really reluctant to teach and not excited about it. So I sort of was a little bit afraid of it myself. And when I was at college, I had some friends who were interested in cars, classic cars. And I was like, that's so cool. They look so cool. They smell good. You're so neat when you're driving one. And so I bought a 1973 Plymouth Duster with the help of my neighbor, because I couldn't even test drive them. I mean, I not only did I not have a license, I literally did not know how to drive. I'd never done go-karts or mini bikes or anything like that. So he helped me buy a car, and then my roommate would help me move it on street cleaning day, because I didn't know how to park, and so between the two of them, they helped me learn how to drive, and then I went and got my license and kind of just took off from there, like one of those late bloomer, this is what I've been missing things.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's funny how things go in cycles. So, when you were young, and you're younger than I, but when you were young, you were not interested in getting your driver's license. And then, when I was 16, that's the only thing you could think about was getting your driver's license. Okay. I lived in the country though. I grew up in West Central Illinois. So if you wanted to go anywhere, you about had to drive. But nowadays, kids are not as quick to get their driver's licenses again. So that's kind of gone full circle where, I think kids can Uber and they can do all these different things that we didn't have the opportunity for. And so a lot of the younger kids that I know talk about they might even race, but they might not have their driver's license.
Really? That's wild.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Well, I mean, there are
insurance is
people.
so expensive for their parents and everything. And I think it's just something that has come full circle. So it's interesting that you were older when you got your driver's license.
Yeah, what you were saying about insurance, for sure. I mean, the costs of everything associated with driving are so much more than even when I was learning how to drive. But it's interesting that you say that you talk to people who are racing but not driving on the street, because I have heard theories of automotive that sort of say, as we move towards an autonomous electric future, kind of cars for fun are going to be more like horses. Like people keep them on car ranches and they do motorsports with them, but they don't drive them on the street. So maybe that's the generation that's going to make that change and be less upset about it. I'd be sad. I love driving.
I would be sad because for me, I just, if I decide I want to get up and go, I just go in the car, and so I don't want to be limited. But it's interesting. It's going to be interesting to see where that goes. And also, of course, NASCAR is talking down the road about maybe having some electric cars. And wow, that's really raised a lot of controversy because people say, well, then we won't be able to hear the sound of the motors and all this. So, well, it'd be interesting to see where that goes. But so tell me a little bit about what you do now and how did you get to the role that you're in?
Oh, it's such a long and twisty story. I am a senior features editor at Car and Driver magazine now, which is a lot of fun. I've been writing about cars now for just about 10 years. But before that, I was doing automotive PR. So I guess I've been writing about cars for maybe 15 years. And I'd always wanted to write for the magazines. Like as soon as I got interested in cars, before I'd even bought a car, I was reading Carcraft. I really liked because it was kind of very accessible and it was a lot about fixing a car. And I thought that was so interesting. That was kind of the thing that I was excited about first. I even considered, maybe I'd be interested in being a mechanic. And as I started to learn more and do more, I realized, well, I like working on cars, but what I really like is talking to people who are working on cars about things that are just way beyond the skill set that I have. I mean, it's one thing to be able to change a starter. It's another thing to be able to build a racing engine or do body work to make a custom car, paint, that kind of thing. So I just thought that was fascinating. And, so I started reading like Hot Rod magazine, all these magazines about custom cars and collector cars. And I just thought, this is the best job. They get to be around all these cars and car culture. Every day is something different. And, they're sort of welcomed in. Everybody's always happy to see you when you're writing a story about their art, right?
Right.
It's not like investigative journalism where you're trying to like do a gotcha. You're just helping people celebrate something that they want to share anyway.
Exactly.
Which I loved that. And I loved getting to talk to race car drivers. And, I was getting to meet my heroes. I remember getting to talk to Shirley Muldowney, pretty early on in writing about cars and just being like, watch this movie, like I can't believe I'm talking to you. So, but it took a while to get there. There were probably 10 years between when I thought I would like to write about cars and when I actually got offered the job at Hot Rod, and that was all David Freiberger, he was the editor-in-chief at the time. He does a video show now called Roadkill, but he really gave me a chance when nobody else would even answer my emails. So I will never not be grateful to him for that. And then since then, of course, I've had wonderful opportunities with a lot of other editors, including now getting to be at Car and Driver.
Exactly. So tell me some of the people that you've interviewed that people would know? I mean, I know there's tons of them, but maybe give me your top 5 or who.
Oh my gosh, the top 5. Um, all right. Well, um, I I did a lot of work with the drag racer Don Prudhomme. We wrote a book together, a book about his life, which was really exciting to be able to do that. And I got to go to England to go drag racing with Roland Leong. I wrote a feature about Shirley Muldowney. I went fishing with Bobby Allison. He's very good at fishing. I'm very bad at fishing. I'm so bad at fishing that he gave up trying to teach me. We're at 4 now. Gosh, it's so hard. I should pick a modern one, right? I did a story where I got to visit Rhiannon Gelsomino, who is a rally co-driver. And she and her husband, they're both rally co-drivers. They're the only like married professional co-driver couple, I think, in the world. And they do a school to teach people to be rally co-drivers. And I got to visit her, and that was really, really fun. She's wonderful, and I very much recommend checking out what she does. It's just an incredible thing, the co-driving.
Yeah, so she's somebody I'm going to have to check out and get on my podcast. And then, it's one thing to obviously live with your spouse, but we know that sometimes when we travel, it doesn't, and we get on the wrong road or take the wrong turn, it's not always pretty. And so to not only, live with your spouse, but also to work and then race and co-drive, that could get a little interesting, I'm sure. So I'm definitely gonna have to check her out. That sounds
you'll have to ask her. I never ask them who gives directions when they're just driving to the store.
Yeah. So that'll be good. I'm going to have you connect the two of us. That would be awesome. So when you go, do you typically I would assume go to the person? You live in LA, so the magazine says we want you to do a story on so and so, and they set up everything and they fly you there. How does that work?
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, the last few years, obviously, travel and face-to-face interviews have been a little bit different, but in general, I go to a lot of events, a lot of races, and I'll get to talk to people there. If I'm doing a special feature, maybe we'll set up a time to meet, spend some time together. And then with Car and Driver, a lot of it now is sort of new car related. So it's a lot of designers and engineers and things. So that's often on a press trip where we're driving a new car, or I'll go to Detroit, meet people there. Okay. So it's all over the place, and obviously just tons of phone calls and emails and Zoom calls and stuff.
Right. I was going to say, I'm assuming you do a lot of Zoom calls probably too for interviews nowadays, because isn't that what we all do for sure? And interesting that you come to Detroit. I'm just 2 hours from there. So I live in Kalamazoo, Michigan, part of the year, most of the year. And then of course I'm in Surprise for the winter, Surprise, Arizona. But that would be awesome. Next time you come to Detroit, maybe we can get together and meet face to face, because I love meeting the women that I interview face to face, and that makes it even more special.
I would love that.
That would be great. So now when you write the story, do they typically say to you, we want you to do a story on, let's say let's just say a certain driver, and then do you do a lot of research so that you know about the driver, so that when you get there, you ask the right questions? Because isn't that part of being a good interviewer? Knowing your person and asking the right questions.
Absolutely. In fact, the one thing kind of across the board that I've realized from talking to people, especially someone who's done thousands of interviews, someone like Don Prudhomme or Richard Petty, Shirley, there's nothing kind of worse for them than someone coming in without any knowledge of what it is that they do and asking questions that are completely irrelevant, or questions that they've answered 8 million times. So you know, you can't always ask a question that, in fact, very rarely can you ask a question that no one's asked before. But, sometimes you can give people a chance to expand on an angle maybe that they hadn't talked about before. Or you can ask about something that they have talked about a lot, but another detail of it. And for sure, doing the research on that, reading other interviews, having some idea of the high and low points of their careers and maybe even their personal lives is very important. I mean, sometimes you just don't have the time to do as much research as you'd like. Sometimes you just meet somebody, and in those cases, it's just helpful to have read a lot already. So at least I feel like what I try to do is have at least one fact about as many people and cars that I can in my head, just one fact, because at least then you could ask about one thing, and then hopefully their answer gives you something to build on.
Right, exactly. And just being knowledgeable about what you're doing. And so, it's like, if I'm in the motorsports field, but if I was only reading HGTV or watching HGTV and reading design magazines, then I wouldn't have the background or the knowledge to talk to somebody in motorsports, because I'm not immersing myself in it. Whereas, because we're passionate about what we do, it doesn't feel like work to read Car and Driver magazine. That's entertainment and enjoyment. And then the things that you learn through reading, watching documentaries, going to races, gives you the background so that you really just can talk to someone and feel comfortable, because you feel like you really do know enough to do the interview.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly the goal. There have been times where I've ended up, in a surprise interview, or I didn't have any prep, and then you just muddle your way through. I mean, everyone's a person, right? So
Right.
you can always ask people, where'd you start? Where do you want to go?
Exactly. And when I set up interviews with people, especially younger girls, they're nervous, because even like over the weekend when I was at Cocoa Paw Speedway in Yuma, I interviewed a couple gals, just a little Facebook, or I recorded it on my phone, and two of them that were actually older of the group that I interviewed had never done an interview before. And they were like, "Oh, I don't know if I can." Excuse me. And I said, "We're just going to have a conversation, and it's your story. I'm not going to ask you anything you're not going to know, because it's about you, so you have to make people feel comfortable. And like you said, if you don't know the person, you can always start with, kind of like I started with you, even though I do know some things about you.
Yeah, we've been chatting.
Tell me who you are, where you started, and why do you love cars? And then you just have a conversation. And so I think having some knowledge is obviously beneficial, but you can probably have a conversation with anyone and come out with a good story.
Yeah, I mean, I would say if I was forced to choose, I mean, hopefully I don't have to, but if I was forced to choose which makes a better interviewer, being a curious people person or being a hardcore research person, I would actually say that it would be, if you had to just do one, just going in as a natural person with a desire to know about other people would take you farther than being just hardcore research.
Oh, I absolutely agree, because being an interviewer, you have to be a people person. That's, to me, that's, to be a good one and to be authentic, come across that you're really interested in the person, because if you're not, it's going to show in the story.
Yeah.
So tell me the process then. Let's say that I'm a famous race car driver, and we meet and you interview me, and so you probably have a set of questions that you're going to ask, and then what do you do after that? Take me from there to publishing the story.
All right. Well, so I'll have my questions, and I would say that in general, my interest, my personal interest in anyone who's successful is sort of what tried to stop you and how did you get around it? Because there's so many reasons to not do what you want to do, and when you meet somebody who's doing really well, at something that is difficult to do well at, it's really important, I think, as a lesson to learn how they manage to get there. So that's usually something that I try to get in my interviews, is what, what obstacles have you overcome to get here? And sometimes, if they're very young, maybe they don't have any yet. And that's interesting too, but so then I'd get home. I usually record my interviews and take notes, because you never know when the recording's not going to work. So
Right.
I usually take notes. I usually try to put a little, like a note I'll keep track of the time on the interviewer, because it'll click through the minutes, and I'll if there's like a really good quote or a really good section, I'll usually mark the time on that one, just in case I'm in a hurry and I have to find it again. And then I'll either transcribe it myself, or these days I usually use a transcription service, because the interviews are long. It takes a long time to transcribe them. And then, you look through the interview, you look through your research, you think about how you're going to lay it out. Sometimes it's a big feature where you've done something together, and it's more storytelling with quotes in it. And then other times it's like a straight interview. Most recently, I interviewed Henrik Fisker, the car designer, about his new electric vehicle. And so that's just a straight Q&A. So something like that, I would write up a small introduction for people who don't know anything about the person. And then you can just trim the questions up, sort of clean them up and organize them a little, because sometimes you have an interview that just jumps all over the place. And, it's hard for people to read it that way. And it's okay to move things around, as long as you're not changing what people are saying.
Right. So you've done lots of different kinds of interviews. What's your favorite? Is it more the Q&A, or is it more go do an experience with someone and then write the story?
Oh, experience for sure. It's, it can be challenging because you don't know, with a Q&A, you almost always are going to have something usable. I've had, I think the hardest Q&A I ever had was Bob Glidden before he passed, because, he doesn't like to answer any questions. And that was the hardest interview, probably, just because, you got a lot of yeses and nos, and there's not a lot in there. But, but even he got excited when he was talking about some other things. He was very into parrots, by the way. They had a lot of big cause. But, so Q&A is simpler to do, but when you get to spend time with somebody, really like shadowing them while they do what they care about, that's just amazing. You learn so much about them. You get to see how they interact with people around them. You see the effect they have on people, which is really interesting. A lot of these folks have just an amazing energy, that, and that could be, it could be somebody very young. I did a rally with Shelby Hall, Rod Hall's granddaughter, and she has a real commanding energy. She's got leadership in the way that she presents herself, and it's really interesting to see her in a group, because people really respond to that in a positive way. Or somebody maybe a little bit more famous, Richard Petty. I was once in a group with Richard Petty, and the man just exudes calm. It's incredible. It's like any tension just fades away, and you're like, oh, no wonder they called him the king, right? Like that is the feeling around him. So you don't really get to experience that in just a Q&A, but if you get to spend time with somebody doing things, then it's really neat.
And I've been at places where Richard Petty's been. I haven't ever had a chance to interview him, but even on television, he just has that very like laid back. He's not going to get his feathers ruffled in, about anything. And I do notice that. And yet his son, to me, Kyle, is totally the opposite. He's just like all over the place. And I love listening to him they do some podcasts and things, but they're so different, really. Their demeanor is so different, but I can see where being around him, you would just be relaxed. And that's really cool for someone who really is so well known in the motorsports field, and could, have some outward portrayal of feelings that it's not warm and fuzzy, but he is kind of that way. I've been places where he's signing autographs and it's like he has all the time in the world for those people.
He is one of the best with his fans, and I talked to him about it once because we were just kept getting interrupted by fans, and he's like, look, this is who I work for.
Right.
I don't work for the car companies. I don't work for NASCAR. I work for the fans. So if I don't take the time to appreciate them, then I don't deserve what they give me. So I thought that was amazing. He also has the most useful tip if you do need to get away from, like, if you need to go on to do another task and there are a lot of people around, which is people will be talking to him and he'll say, let's walk and talk. And then he'll start walking and people will kind of patter along for a little while. And then they kind of like drift away because they don't really want to like walk the whole way. So I thought that was amazing because it was so polite and it was so effective.
Absolutely. And, there's a lot of things he could teach some of these younger drivers. Right? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think he would say too, I mean, any of them would probably agree that the whole scene has changed a lot. I mean, there are things that are a lot easier for the drivers now, but there are also things that are a lot harder. The legacy drivers, they didn't have to deal with social media and constant cameras and kind of constant feedback on their performances. I did an interview with Bubba Wallace a few years ago. And it was so interesting because here's this guy who's sort of been thrust into a position, a very important and needed position of kind of representing, racial equality and civil rights. And, he's just a guy who wants to race like the rest of them,
right.
And that was sort of something that I think that the drivers in the past mostly didn't deal with so much. Willie T. Ribbs did, obviously.
But even Jeff Gordon and even Jimmy Johnson, really, they're more recent drivers than some, but even at that, the social media and those things really weren't as much a part of their lives as now. Everything, every tweet, everything that happens, the keyboard crazies have something to say about it. And it's so frustrating for me when I see, it's like they're complaining about the scheme, the design scheme of the car or whatever. And I'm thinking, can you find anything good to say? Why do you have to always nitpick? And it's so frustrating. And of course now, a lot of the big controversy in NASCAR is Brandon Brown. And it's so frustrating for me. I feel so bad for the kid.
Yeah.
He didn't ask for any of this. He's
just kind of doing the best he can with it. And I feel it's probably come up when you've interviewed some of the younger women who are racing too. I know that it's especially difficult for women because not only do they get all of the same kind of inputs, negative inputs that the male racers get, but they also get very sexualized and sort of attacked based off of that. Whether they're, if they're very pretty, they get comments that they shouldn't be so pretty. If they're normal, lovely looking people, they get comments that they should be prettier. And I can't imagine trying to keep your head together, focused on winning races and doing these incredible tasks while you're also just, a teenager being told you're either too pretty or not pretty enough. I talked with Erica Enders about it once before a little bit because, she's obviously somebody who is incredibly skilled at what she does and has had some challenges getting sponsorship because of not, meeting certain expectations.
Right. And that's so unfair because so many times those women, if you interview them, and you ask them anything about being a woman in motorsports, a lot of times what they're going to say is the car doesn't know the difference. The motorcycle doesn't know the difference. You know, when I get in, I'm just another race car driver. And you know, as a person that really promotes women in motorsports, something that I'm finding even to find sponsors, advertisers, etc., for the things that I do, the companies that are missing the boat are the companies that gear towards women, or, you know, because they look at motorsports and they think, oh, Clairol, why would Clairol want to be part of motorsports? Well, I'll tell you why, because 50% or more of the fans in the stands are women, and the buying power in the home tends to be around 90% woman driven. So there's lots of reasons why Erica and Haley Deegan and all these other women shouldn't have any trouble finding sponsors, and yet it's such a struggle. And it's just, it seems so unfair to me, because they're some of the best drivers.
Yeah, I mean, I do feel optimistic, though. I mean, there are so many more women who are racing now.
Yes.
There's so, especially like, you know, younger women. And also there are so many more women who are talking about being fans. I mean, I don't know if you follow F1 a whole lot, but
Yeah.
the conversation in F1 went from being something where, you know, I knew like 5 women who cared about F1, you know, they were all fellow car people. And all of a sudden, you know, you can go on Twitter and you can see people who have no connection to automotive in any other way, talking about the recent F1 race, who they like, who won, why they like it. And I love that. You know, I think that's so great, because I think that it really does, it benefits everyone.
Yes.
And it'll benefit the car companies too, because as you said, you know, not only are women watching motorsports and making buying decisions, they're also buying cars. Yeah, you know, like you said, it's an equal split. I think women buy possibly more new cars than men do.
They do.
Household stuff, because they're a lot of times responsible for the family car. And
exactly. I'm sorry, my husband's phone's going off in the background, but I can't do anything about it. He's not here, and I can't believe he didn't take his phone with him. So I apologize for that.
Sounds like there's a cow walking by.
Okay. We'll pretend there's a cow walking by instead of a phone. I should have checked that. I'm sorry about that. You know, as far as like F1 and IndyCar, any of those kind of motorsports, that the women are really coming out of the woodwork and following those now. So last year, believe it or not, I went to my first IndyCar race. Now I live in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and I used to live in Illinois, and I was really close to Indy, like within a few hours. Have never been to the Indy 500, but I'm going this year. I already have my tickets. But last year, my husband and I went to Nashville to the Indy race, and wow, what an experience that was. So cool. And of course, love Nashville anyway. But it just you know, and then you're like, oh, I know some of these racers, and now this one, I bought a t-shirt from this guy because I really liked how he raced. And there were a lot of women in the grandstands at that race. And so I think every kind of racing is growing as far as the women participating, and not just drivers. I interview a lot of people who are engineers or PR or social media, or whatever it might be. Women are involved in all aspects of motorsports, and it's growing and growing. And I'm with you. I'm very optimistic about the future and where it's going.
Yeah. Oh, good. Me too. And yes, the women engineers, I'm loving seeing. Every time I see a ponytail in a pit crew, I'm like, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. One of my good friends is a tire specialist for a NASCAR team, and she's been with a couple different teams, but just love. And she's a little tiny thing, and she just throws those tires around, you know. And, you know, like a few years ago, we were in Chicago, and it was in the hundreds every day on concrete, which makes it worse. And she was working 12-hour days right alongside the guys. And, that's the part that a lot of people who come to the races don't see. They don't see the behind the scenes, how many hours they work, long hours in the heat, and all this. And so I try, and I hope in the future I'm even better at showing the backside, that people don't always see. When they come, they buy a ticket, they sit in the grandstand, they watch the race, they go home. They're missing a lot of what it takes to put that race on.
Yeah, well, that's the job for us then, right?
Right.
Not just interviewing drivers, but interviewing engineers and mechanics and truck drivers. There's a lot of people who puts a lot of hours in.
Absolutely. So what's your favorite thing about what you do?
Oh, that's easy. So my favorite thing about what I do now is that it's always different. Every day is different. I remember when I first started working, I mean, really like high school, and I would look at the calendar and I'd be like, I know what I'm doing all of these days, flip those pages and I would quit whatever I was doing like the next week. Like I couldn't stand having everything just fit into those little squares already locked down. And what I get to do now is different every day. I mean, I'm talking to you later today. I'm talking to somebody about the creation of the race car bed. The plastic race car bed that looked like a McLaren from the 70s.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of copies now that look more like cars. Well, I mean, it's a fascinating story. There's one guy invented that, and so I'm going to talk about that. And then later I'm going to write up a review of a Supra that I drove. Yesterday I was up in the hills near Ojai, California, which is beautiful. And I was driving new cars. I was driving an Elantra and just cruising around for photos. And then, tomorrow something different altogether. So I think that is just amazing. And then of course, just what I'm able to do, the people who invite me into their shops, into their studios, the cars I'm allowed to drive. It's astonishing.
Absolutely. Yeah. I can't even imagine, you think, what next week looks like, and then all of a sudden something exciting comes up and you're off to do whatever. And that would be so fun. And you have to be a very spontaneous person, I think, in some ways, to be able to handle all of that.
It's good to be able to sort of roll with the punches, because you never quite know how it's going to work out, but
right.
It's always interesting.
So what's your goal for the future? If maybe this is your dream job, or if you had, what's your goal down the road? Where do you see yourself in 5 or 10 years?
Well, as you may have guessed from the previous answer, I don't really do a whole lot of planning for very far ahead. So, I mean, I'm hoping that I am still doing something very similar to what I'm doing now. I really love it. I think there's a lot more to be done. I enjoy when I have a chance to help other people get started in this. People sometimes ask me, well, how do I do what you do? Well, read a lot and start writing. I enjoy doing video stuff as well. So, and that's a medium that I think is really growing for a lot of us journalists to be able to start telling our stories via video. So I'd like to be doing a little bit more of that down the road, but more cars, more people, maybe write another book. I don't know.
Interesting. You have a lot of possibilities at your fingertips, right? There's, the cars aren't going away. Motorsports is here to stay, regardless of what everybody says or people, the negative Nellies, there's the car manufacturers are going to keep creating new and interesting cars with new and better features. I have a Dodge Rebel truck. It's my truck. And people look at it and they say to my husband, "Oh, I like your truck." And he'll be the first one to say, "Oh, this is my wife's truck." And, the features on it and the things it does, and it's so comfortable to drive. And I love my truck. And they just keep making things better and nicer, and the car companies, I can't imagine working there and trying to think what's the next new thing, because it seems like they've got them all on there, but fun things.
Yeah, well, they always come up with something new, and the stuff moves from luxury cars down to more affordable cars. I mean, things like heated seats you can get in almost anything now, and oh, they're really nice.
They are.
And I drove classics for so long that when I first started writing about new cars, I was just impressed by anything. I'd be like, oh my God, the defroster works. Have you seen the defroster? It works. It's great.
Uh-huh.
This thing
Yeah.
started, defroster works.
I had a Lincoln, which was an amazing car, and it had heated and cooled seats. Now the cooling part I didn't use as much, and of course I lived in Michigan at the time, so I did use the heated seats all the time. But I have an older Honda CRV that we pull behind our motorhome when we come to Arizona, and it's a great car. I love my Honda, but it's older and it does not have the heated seats. And I said to my husband, we were on a trip recently, because I like to have that heat on my back, even, when it's warm out. I said, is there a way I could plug a heating pad or something into this car? Because I missed my heated seats. And he just laughed, but yeah, it's a good industry to be in. It's always developing and changing. And to be a part of it is pretty exciting, isn't it?
Absolutely. I feel lucky every day. I really do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, is there anything that I haven't asked you about that you'd like to share about yourself, what you do, anything at all?
I mean, you are clearly a very experienced interviewer, because I don't think that you've missed anything.
Well, I owned a weekly newspaper for 10 years, quite some years ago. And my most favorite thing was writing human interest stories. And it was a little weekly newspaper called the Eagle News, because I lived right along the Mississippi River, and it was the winter nesting ground of the American bald eagle. So it was called the Eagle News, and the tagline was the good newspaper, because we didn't print the court reports and all the negative. It was a weekly newspaper, and we focused on the good in our community, and I loved that part of it. And I've kind of transitioned that into my online magazine that I do about women in motorsports and the podcast. I want to know the good.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful. And and again, like that kind of it's all right there when you're covering motorsports and cars, and especially when you're covering women coming into car stuff, because it's all good news. If there's more women, then that's good news.
Absolutely. Well, Elana, I've really enjoyed talking with you. I know we've tried to do this for a while, and I'm glad we finally were able to connect today and share your story. And hopefully more women are going to be reading Car and Driver now, because they know you and they know what you write about. And so I've really enjoyed speaking with you today, and hopefully when you get to Detroit or somewhere else close that we could get together, I would love to meet you in person.
Oh, well, likewise. Thank you so much. I am honored to be amongst the group that you have previously interviewed. So it's good company, and I hope I'll get to see you in person this year.
All right. Thank you so much.